Nordic hammer. Hill 152, Iceland. I know that was a fighter, and there had to be more than one, Edwards said. It was raining again, probably for the last time. The clouds to the southwest were breaking up, and there was a hint of clear sky on the horizon. Edwards just sat there in his helmet and poncho, staring into the distance. I suppose you're right, sir, Smith replied. The sergeant was nervous. They'd been on this hilltop for almost 24 hours, a long time to be stationary in hostile country. The best time to move out would have been during the rain showers, when visibility was cut to a few hundred yards. Soon the sky might be clear again, and it wouldn't get dark again for quite a while. As it was, they sat on their hilltop in camouflage ponchos that kept them partly dry and wholly miserable. There was a heavy shower north of them that prevented their seeing Reykjavik, and they could barely make out Hafnarfjordur to the west, which worried the sergeant, who wanted to know what Ivan was up to. What if they detected Edwards' satellite radio and began to triangulate on it? What if there were patrols out? Lieutenant? Yes, Sarge? We got those phone lines on one side of us and those power lines on the other. You want to blow some up? Edwards smiled. No, sir, but Ivan is going to start patrolling them soon, and this ain't a very good place for us to make contact. We're supposed to observe and report, Sarge, Edwards said without conviction. Yes, sir. Edwards checked his watch. It was 1955 Zulu. Doghouse might want to talk with him, though they hadn't called into him yet. Edwards broke the radio out of the pack again, assembled the pistol grip antenna, and donned his headset. At 1959, he switched on and tracked in on the satellite carrier wave. Doghouse calling Beagle. Doghouse calling Beagle. Do you copy? Over. Well, how about that? He toggled the transmit switch. Roger. We're here, Doghouse. Anything new to report?
Roll left. Roll left.
Negative, unless you want to know about the rain. Visibility is down. We can't see very much. A communications watch officer at Doghouse looked at a weather map. So it really was raining there. He hadn't been able to convince his boss that Beagle could be trusted. Edwards had answered the questions that the counterintelligence guys had come up with. They'd even had a voice stress analyzer handy to check the tapes of his answers. The needle had pegged on the last answer about his girlfriend. That hadn't been faked. Copies of the relevant parts of his personnel package had been faxed to them. Upper fifth of his class at Colorado Springs, good in math and engineering studies, did extremely well in his post-graduation studies in meteorology. His eyesight had worsened slightly during his tenure at Colorado Springs, becoming just bad enough to keep him from flying. Regarded as quiet and shy, but evidently well-liked by his classmates. Not a warrior type. How long would the kid last?
Go right. Go right.
Keflavik, Iceland. One MiG-29 was flying. The others were in the hardened shelters the Americans had only just finished at the end of runway 11. The fighter's mission was twofold. It was a standing combat air patrol aircraft should an incoming raid be detected. But more importantly, it was being tracked carefully by the ground radar controllers. Their radar needed to be calibrated. Iceland's irregular terrain made for troublesome radar performance. And as with the surface-to-air missiles, the instruments themselves had been badly jostled by the trip aboard the Pusik. The fighter flew circles around the airport, while the radar operators determined that what their instruments told them was correct. The fighters were fully fueled and armed, their pilots resting on cots near them. At the moment, the Bowsers were fueling the Badger bomber that had given the fighters navigational and electronic support. Soon it would be leaving to bring in 9 more. The Air Force detachment was rapidly finishing their job of clearing the airfield. All but one of the runways was swept clear of fragments now. The remains of the American aircraft had been bulldozed off the pavement. The fuel pipeline would be repaired in an hour, the engineer said. Quite a busy day, the major said to the fighter commander. It's not over yet. I'll feel better when we get the rest of the regiment in, the colonel observed quietly. They should have hit us already. How do you expect them to attack? The colonel shrugged. Hard to say. If they're really serious about closing this field, they'll use a nuclear warhead. Are you always so optimistic, Comrade Colonel? The raid was an hour away. The 18 B-52H bombers had left Louisiana 10 hours before and landed to refuel at Sandrestrom Air Force Base on Greenland's west coast. 50 miles ahead of them were a single Raven EF-111 jamming aircraft and 4 F-4 Phantoms configured for defense suppression. The radar was about halfway calibrated, though what had been done was the easy part. The fighter that had just landed had flown racetrack ovals from due north around the western horizon to due south of Keflavik. The area to the west of the airbase, though not exactly flat, was nearly known with low Russian. Next came the hard part, plotting radar coverage of the eastern arc over Iceland's mountainous center, a solid collection of hills that worked up to the island's tall central peak. Another fulcrum rolled off the runway to begin this task, its pilot wondering how long it might take to map all the null areas blanked to radar coverage by the steep valleys, areas that an attacking aircraft could use to mask its approach to Keflavik. The radar officers were plotting probable troublesome spots on their topographical maps when an operator shouted a warning. Their clear radar screens had just turned to hash from powerful electronic jammers. That could mean only one thing. The klaxons sounded in the fighter shelters at the end of runway 11. Fighter pilots, who had been dozing or playing dominoes, jumped to their feet and raced to their aircraft. The tower officer lifted the field phone to give more exact warning to the fighters, then called up the missile battery commander. Incoming air raid. Men leaped into action all across the airbase. The fighter ground crews hit the built-in self-starters, turning the jet engines even as the pilots climbed into the cockpits. The SAM battery turned on its search and fire control systems while the launch vehicles slewed their missiles into firing position. Just under the radar horizon, 18 B-52 bombers had just lit off their ECM jamming systems. They were deployed in 6 groups of 3 each. The first skimmed over the top of Mount Snæfell, 60 miles north of Keflavik, and the rest came from all around the west side of the compass, converging on the target behind a wall of electronic noise provided by their own systems and the supporting EF-111 Raven jammer. The Russian fighter just lifting off climbed to altitude, the pilot keeping his radar off as he scanned the sky visually, waiting for intercept information from the ground-based radar. His comrades were even now taxiing into the open, racing straight down the runway and into the sky. The aircraft that had just landed taxied to a fuel bowser, its pilot gesturing and cursing at the ground crewmen who were struggling to fuel his fighter. In their haste, they spilled 10 gallons of fuel over the wing. Amazingly, it did not ignite, and a dozen men ran in with CO2 extinguishers to prevent an explosion as the fighter drank in a full load of fuel. Hill 152, Iceland. Edwards's head jerked up at the noise, the distinctive roar of jet fighters. He saw a dark trail of smoke approaching in from the east and the west. The shapes were heavy with ordnance, the up-angled wingtips making identification easy. F-4s, he hooted. They're our guys. They were Phantom jets of the New York Air National Guard, configured as wild weasel SAM killers. While Russian attention was on the converging bomber raid, they skimmed over hilltops and down valleys, using the crenellated landscape to mask their low-level approach. The backseat crewmen in each aircraft counted the missile radars, selecting the most dangerous targets. When they got to within 10 miles of Keflavik, they popped up high and fired a salvo of standard arm anti-radar missiles. The Russians were caught by surprise. Laboring to direct missile fire at the bombers, they didn't expect a 2-part raid. The incoming missiles were not detected. 3 of the arms found targets, killing 2 search radars and a missile launch vehicle. One launch commander turned his vehicle around and trained manually on the new threat. The Phantoms jammed his fire control radar, leaving behind a series of chaff clouds as they came in at 30-foot height. As each pilot raced to the target area assigned to him, he conducted a hasty visual search. One saw an undamaged SAM launcher and streaked toward it, dropping Rockeye cluster bomb canisters that fell short but spread over 100 bomblets all over the area. The SA-11 launcher exploded in his wake. Its crew never knew what had happened. 1,000 yards beyond it was a mobile anti-aircraft gun vehicle. The Phantom engaged it with his own cannon, badly damaging it as he swept across the rest of the peninsula and escaped back over the sea, a cloud of chaff and flares in his wake. It was a letter-perfect weasel mission. All 4 aircraft were gone before the Soviet missile crews were able to react. The 2 SAMs that were launched exploded harmlessly in chaff clouds. The battery had lost 2/3 of its launcher vehicles and all of its search radars. 3 of the mobile guns were also destroyed or damaged. The bombers were now a mere 20 miles out, their powerful ECM jamming systems drowning the Soviet radar with electronic noise. They could not defeat the radar on the mobile guns, however. The new system had a radar for which they were not equipped, but it didn't matter. The guns had been designed to deal with small fighters, and when their radars tried to lock on the huge bombers, they found a target so large that their radar signals traced from one part to another. The computers could not decide what the target range was, and kept recycling automatically, rendering the electronics package useless. The gun crews cursed as one man and switched over to manual fire control, using their eyes to sight in on the massive incoming targets. The bombers popped up to 900 feet now, hoping to avoid the worst of the gunfire and escape without loss. They had not been warned of a possible fighter presence. Their mission was to wreck Keflavik before fighters could get there. Now surprise was on the Soviet side. The fulcrums dived out of the sun at the bombers. Their own fire control radars were nearly useless as they approached, but half their missiles were infrared guided, and the American bombers gave off enough heat to attract the attention of a blind man in a fur coat. The southbound flight of 3 never saw them coming in. 2 took missile hits and exploded in midair. The third radioed for fighter cover, jinking his aircraft hard, too hard. His second dive bottomed out too late, and the aircraft disintegrated on the ground north of Keflavik in a fireball visible to Edwards 30 miles away. The Russian fighters were experiencing an airman's dream. All 8 aircraft had individual targets, and they split to hunt them singly before Keflavik absorbed too many bomb hits. The bomber crews pressed in on their targets. It was too late to run away, and all they could do was scream for the fighters to come back and support them. The ground-based gunners joined in. Firing over open sights, a young sergeant hit a bomber just dropping its load. The bomb bay took a dozen rounds, and the aircraft vanished in a deafening explosion that shook the sky and damaged yet another B-52. One missile launch crew successfully switched their missile control systems to the backup infrared mode and fired a single rocket at a bomber. It hit just after the bombs were released. The bomber's wing erupted in flame, and the aircraft swooped east, trailing a black river of smoke. They watched it approach their hill, a wounded monster whose right wing trailed burning fuel. The pilot was trying to maintain altitude so that his crew could eject, but all 4 of his right engines were gone, and the burning wing collapsed. The bomber staggered in the air and dropped, rolling into the west face of Hill 152. None of the crew escaped. Edwards didn't have to give an order. In 5 seconds, his men had packed their gear and were running northeast. The remaining bombers were now over the target and screaming for help from their escorting fighters. 8 successfully dropped their bomb loads before turning clear of the area. The Soviet fighters had claimed 5 by now, and the surviving crews were desperate to escape the unexpected hazard. The Russians were now out of missiles and attempting to engage with their cannon. That was dangerous. The B-52s retained their tail guns, and one fulcrum was damaged by machine gun fire from his target and had to break off. Turn of the American Phantoms. They carried only 3 Sparrow missiles each, and when they lit off their missile intercept radars, the Soviet fighters all received warning tones from their defense systems. The fulcrums scattered before the 12 incoming missiles and dove for the ground. 4 dropped down right on top of Edwards's group, swooping low over a crashed B-52 east of Hafnerfjordur. When they came back up, the sky was clear again. The Phantoms were short on fuel. They could not press their attack and turned away without a single kill. The surviving bombers were now safely hidden in the cloud and vanished. The Soviets reformed and moved back to Keflavik. Their first impression was a bad one. Fully 200 bombs had fallen within the airport perimeter, and 9 of them had found runway targets. But runway 11 was unscarred. As they watched, the single fulcrum left on the ground roared off into the sky, its pilot frantic with rage, demanding a vector to a target. He was ordered to patrol as the rest of the squadron landed to refuel. The first battle had mixed results. The Americans lost half their bomber force in return for damaging 3 of Keflavik's 5 runways. The Soviets had most of a SAM battery smashed to little gain, but Keflavik was still usable. Already the ground personnel were running to the runway repair equipment left behind by the At the end of each runway was a pile of gravel, and a half-dozen bunkers contained steel mats. Heavy equipment could bulldoze the debris back into the hole, even it out, then cover it over with gravel and steel. Keflavik was damaged, but its runways would be fully operational again before